Groom's parents mocked the bride's elderly father, but his wedding gift left everyone stunned. They say first impressions can make or break relationships. But what happens when those impressions are built on prejudice and misplaced pride? Imagine walking into a room filled with people who think they're better than you, not because of who you are, but because of where you come from. That's exactly what happened to Joseph, an elderly craftsman whose quiet dignity became the center of attention at his daughter Naomi's wedding. What started as subtle mockery soon turned into something no one expected. A moment that would challenge everything the groom's wealthy family believed about wealth, legacy, and respect. The story begins in the grand estate of the Vanderholts, a family known for their lineage, opulence, and unshakable status. Their mansion is like something out of a movie. Marble columns, towering chandeliers, and walls lined with portraits of ancestors whose stern faces seem to judge every visitor. Richard Vanderholt, the patriarch, carries himself with authority, always impeccably dressed and deliberate in his words. His wife Eleanor moves through society with polished grace, ensuring the family name remains untarnished. Together, they've spent decades grooming their son William to follow in their footsteps, to marry someone who fits perfectly into their world of privilege. But life has a way of throwing curveballs, and this time, it came in the form of Naomi, a kind-hearted woman raised by her father Joseph, a humble woodcarver. From the moment Naomi entered the picture, there was tension. When William introduced her to his parents, the absence of a familiar last name sent ripples through the carefully curated calm of the Vanderholt household. "A woodcarver," Richard repeated, his tone heavy with implication, as if the word itself carried some kind of shame. It wasn't just Joseph's profession that unsettled them. It was everything he represented: simplicity, hard work, and values that couldn't be measured in bank accounts. Yet, despite their thinly veiled disdain, Joseph remained unfazed. He knew how the world worked, and he wasn't about to change who he was to fit someone else's mold. As the wedding planning unfolded, the divide between the two families grew wider. The Vanderholts transformed what Naomi and William envisioned as an intimate ceremony into a spectacle of extravagance, lavish floral arrangements, imported delicacies, and guest lists filled with high society elites, all designed to showcase the family's wealth and influence. For Naomi, it felt suffocating. She watched as her dreams were replaced with decisions she had no say in, all while her father stood quietly in the background, observing the chaos with patient eyes. Joseph didn't need to voice his thoughts. His presence alone was a reminder of what truly mattered: family, love, and the lessons passed down through generations. But the real turning point came during the reception, when gifts were presented to the newlyweds. One by one, beautifully wrapped packages adorned with luxury brand insignias were unveiled. Jewelry, rare art pieces, even property deeds. Each gift screamed wealth and power, reinforcing the Vanderholts' belief that material possessions defined success. And then, almost as an afterthought, a small bundle wrapped in dark cloth appeared. There were no ribbons, no flashy packaging, just something simple and unassuming. The murmurs began immediately. Some guests exchanged amused glances. Others leaned in with curiosity. Even Eleanor struggled to maintain her composure as the servant placed the package before Naomi and William. When Naomi unwrapped the gift, revealing a beautifully carved wooden mask, the room fell silent. At first glance, it seemed so out of place among the glittering treasures surrounding it. A few chuckles broke the silence, followed by whispers of disbelief. "A mask? Really?" someone muttered under their breath. But Joseph wasn't fazed. Slowly rising from his seat, He walked toward the couple, his movements deliberate and steady. As he placed his hand on the mask, the energy in the room shifted. This wasn't just any carving. It was a piece of history, passed down through generations, each groove and swirl telling a story of resilience, tradition, and love. Joseph's voice cut through the lingering amusement like a knife. "This mask," he began, his tone calm, yet commanding, "was carved by my great-great-grandfather over 150 years ago. It wasn't made for show or profit. It was created to symbolize strength, unity, and the responsibility of building a family." The guests listened intently now, their earlier smirks fading, as Joseph spoke about the meaning behind the gift. He explained how it had been handed down through generations, given only to those who understood that true legacy isn't written in wealth, but in the choices we make and the lives we touch. By the time he finished, the room was eerily quiet. For Richard and Eleanor, the moment was unbearable. They had planned this day to celebrate their family's dominance, to reinforce their place at the top of the social hierarchy. Instead, they found themselves overshadowed by a man they had underestimated, a man whose worth couldn't be measured in dollars or titles. William, standing beside Naomi, looked at the mask with newfound reverence. In that moment, he realized what true value meant. It wasn't about the fortune his parents had amassed or the connections they flaunted. It was about the stories we carry, the love we share, and the legacies we leave behind. And yet, the night was far from over. As the initial shock wore off, questions lingered in the air. How would Richard and Eleanor respond to being humbled in front of their peers? Would they acknowledge the depth of Joseph's gift? Or would they cling to their beliefs, refusing to see beyond their own biases? Meanwhile, Naomi and William stood together, united not just as husband and wife, but as partners determined to forge their own path, one rooted in authenticity rather than superficiality. But here's the thing. The most powerful moments often happen when we least expect them. Just as the evening seemed to settle into uneasy reflection, another twist emerged, one that would force everyone in that ballroom to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and the world they lived in. You won't want to miss what happens next, because sometimes the smallest gestures hold the greatest power. Stay tuned to find out how this unforgettable night unfolds and discover why the richest man in the room wasn't the one wearing a designer suit. The weight of Joseph's words lingered in the air, heavy and unshakable. For Richard and Eleanor Vanderholt, it was as if the ground beneath their polished marble floors had shifted. They had spent decades building a fortress of wealth and status, only to have its walls cracked by something they couldn't comprehend. A legacy that didn't come with a price tag. The mask sat on the table, its intricate carvings glowing faintly under the chandelier's light, almost mocking them with its quiet power. Some guests began whispering among themselves, their earlier amusement replaced by uneasy admiration. Others avoided eye contact altogether, sensing that the evening had taken a turn none of them could ignore. Naomi stood close to her father, her heart swelling with pride, but also bracing for what might come next. She knew the Vanderholts weren't used to being challenged, especially not in front of an audience. Her hands trembled slightly as she clasped William's arm, drawing strength from his presence. William, too, seemed caught between two worlds, the one he'd grown up in and the one Naomi and Joseph represented. He glanced at his parents, noting the tension in their expressions, then back at the mask. It wasn't just a gift. It was a mirror reflecting everything the Vanderholts valued and everything they lacked. Richard finally broke the silence, his voice steady but laced with thinly veiled frustration. "Joseph," he began, leaning forward slightly in his chair. "You've certainly given us all something to think about tonight." His tone suggested he was trying to regain control of the situation, to steer the conversation back into familiar territory where he felt comfortable. But Joseph didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied Richard with the same calm intensity he'd shown throughout the evening, as though seeing through the polished veneer to the man underneath. "It's not about thinking," Joseph replied at last, his voice low, but carrying enough weight to command attention. "It's about understanding. Legacy isn't something you build with money or titles. It's something you live every day. And when you pass it on, it's not because of what you own, but because of who you are." The room fell silent again, the truth of his words sinking in like rain after a drought. Even those who had initially dismissed him now found themselves unable to look away. Eleanor, ever the diplomat, attempted to smooth over the growing unease. "Of course, Joseph," she said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We understand the sentiment behind your gift. It's meaningful." She emphasized the last word carefully, as if trying to reconcile her worldview with what she'd just witnessed. But Naomi saw right through it. Her mother-in-law wasn't conceding anything. She was retreating, regrouping, searching for a way to reassert dominance without appearing petty. Meanwhile, whispers spread among the guests. A few openly admired Joseph's composure and the depth of his message, while others clung stubbornly to their belief in material wealth as the ultimate measure of success. One particularly vocal guest, a woman draped in diamonds and arrogance, spoke up, her tone dripping with condescension. "It's lovely, really," she said, gesturing vaguely toward the mask. "But surely, in today's world, practical gifts hold more value. After all, what can a wooden carving do for a young couple starting their lives together?" Her comment sparked murmurs of agreement from some corners of the room, but Naomi felt her blood boil. Before she could respond, however, Joseph stepped forward once more. "What can it do?" he repeated, his voice rising just enough to silence the murmurs. "It reminds them of where they come from, of the values that matter, not the ones you wear or display, but the ones you carry in your heart. It teaches them that love is built on respect, patience, and sacrifice. Can your diamonds teach that?" The room froze, the woman's face flushing red as Joseph's gaze bore into hers. No one dared speak. As the tension reached its peak, William made a decision that would change everything. Setting the mask down gently, he turned to face his parents, his expression resolute. "Mom, Dad," he said, his voice firm despite the storm brewing inside him. "I need to say something." All eyes turned to him, including Naomi's, whose grip tightened around his hand. Richard raised an eyebrow, clearly expecting another attempt to bridge the gap between their worlds. But William had no intention of playing mediator anymore. "For years, I've done everything you asked of me," he continued, his words cutting through the room like a blade. "I went to the schools you chose, joined the clubs you approved of, dated the women you thought suitable. I followed the script you wrote for my life because I believed it was the right path. But tonight, standing here with Naomi and looking at this mask, I realize how wrong I was." He paused, glancing at Naomi before turning back to his parents. "You taught me to value stability, security, and reputation, but you never taught me about love or about the kind of legacy that truly matters." The room erupted into murmurs again, the guests exchanging shocked looks. Richard's face darkened, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the table. "William," he said sharply, his voice edged with warning, "this isn't the time or place." "No," William interrupted, surprising even himself with his boldness. This is exactly the time. Because if we don't talk about it now, we never will. You've spent your lives chasing wealth and status, believing it would protect our family name. But what good is a name if it doesn't mean anything? What good is a fortune if it doesn't make you happy? He gestured toward Joseph, who stood quietly watching the scene unfold. Look at him. He has nothing compared to what you have. And yet he's richer than any of us will ever be. Why? Because he knows what truly matters. The impact of William's words hit like a tidal wave. Naomi felt tears welling up in her eyes, overwhelmed by the courage it must have taken for him to stand up to his parents in such a public setting. Richard, for his part, looked as though he'd been slapped. His carefully constructed image of authority and control was crumbling before his eyes. And there was nothing he could do to stop it. Eleanor, meanwhile, struggled to maintain her composure, her perfectly manicured hands trembling as she reached for her wine glass. But the real surprise came when one of the older guests, a man named Harold, known for his vast art collection and sharp wit, spoke up. You know, he said, his voice carrying across the room, I've spent millions buying paintings, sculptures, antiques, all in the name of preserving my legacy. And yet, I don't own a single thing with the kind of history that Mars carries. Not one. His admission sent ripples through the crowd, forcing others to confront uncomfortable truths about their own lives. Some nodded in agreement, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The moment hung precariously. Like a thread stretched to its limit, would Richard lash out, doubling down on his beliefs? Would Eleanor try to salvage the evening with empty pleasantries? Or would someone else step forward, tipping the scales in an unexpected direction? As the clock ticked closer to midnight, the ballroom buzzed with anticipation, each guest holding their breath, waiting to see how the night would end, and whether the Vanderholt's carefully guarded empire would survive the challenge posed by a humble craftsman and his timeless gift. The ripple of silence in the ballroom was broken by an unexpected voice. Harold, the older man, who had earlier admitted his admiration for Joseph's mask. He stood up slowly, his movements deliberate, and addressed the room. I've spent decades collecting art, antiques, and treasures from around the world, he began, his tone reflective but firm. But tonight I realized something. None of those things hold the kind of history or meaning that this mask carries. His words hung in the air, heavy with truth. For Richard and Eleanor Vanderholt, Harold's declaration felt like a betrayal. They had always considered him one of their own, a man who understood the importance of wealth and status. Yet here he was, openly acknowledging the depth of Joseph's gift and exposing the emptiness of their own values. The guests exchanged uneasy glances, some nodding in agreement, others visibly uncomfortable as they processed what they had just witnessed. It was clear that the evening had shifted irreversibly, leaving the Vanderholts isolated in their rigid worldview. Naomi, standing beside her father, felt a surge of pride mixed with relief. She had feared this moment would end in humiliation, but instead, it had become a turning point, not just for her and William, but for everyone present. William, too, seemed transformed. Holding the mask in his hands, he turned to face his parents once more. You taught me to value stability, security, and reputation, he said, his voice steady, despite the storm of emotions inside him. But tonight, I learned what true legacy means. It's not about preserving a name or accumulating wealth. It's about building something meaningful, something that lasts beyond us. Richard's face flushed red, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the table. For the first time in his life, he found himself at a loss for words. Eleanor, ever the diplomat, attempted to salvage the situation. "Of course, William," she said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We understand the sentiment behind your words, but let's not forget the practicalities of life. Wealth ensures comfort, opportunities, and a future for generations to come." Her argument sounded hollow, even to her own ears. Joseph, still standing calmly amidst the chaos, finally spoke again. "Comfort and opportunity are important," he acknowledged, his voice carrying a quiet authority. "But they mean nothing if you lose sight of what truly matters: love, respect, and the lessons we pass on to those who come after us." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "Your wealth can buy you many things, but it cannot buy character, humility, or the strength to stand firm when the world tries to break you." The room fell silent once more, the weight of Joseph's words pressing down on everyone. Even Richard, who had spent his entire life measuring success in dollars and titles, found himself questioning the foundation upon which he had built his empire. Naomi reached out to take her father's hand, her heart swelling with gratitude. In that moment, she realized that Joseph hadn't just given her and William a wedding gift. He had given them a lesson they would carry for the rest of their lives. As the evening drew to a close, the atmosphere in the ballroom remained subdued. Some guests approached Joseph to express their admiration for his craftsmanship and wisdom, while others lingered awkwardly, unsure how to reconcile what they had seen with their own beliefs. Richard and Eleanor retreated to a corner of the room, speaking in hushed tones, though they tried to maintain their composure. It was evident that the night had shaken them to their core. William and Naomi stood together near the exit, watching as Joseph prepared to leave. "Thank you," William said, shaking Joseph's hand with genuine respect. "Not just for the mask, but for everything you've shown us tonight." Joseph smiled, his weathered face softening. "It's not about me," he replied. "It's about the choices you make moving forward. Build a life worth remembering." With that, Joseph walked out into the cool night air, his figure disappearing into the shadows. As the newlyweds watched him go, they knew their journey was only beginning. The challenges ahead wouldn't be easy. They would have to navigate two very different worlds and find a way to honor both. But for the first time, they felt confident in their ability to do so. In the days that followed, the story of Joseph's gift spread far beyond the confines of the Vanderholt estate. Guests who had attended the wedding recounted the events to friends and family, each retelling adding another layer of significance to the tale. For some, it served as a reminder of the fleeting nature of material wealth. For others, it was a call to reevaluate their priorities and focus on what truly mattered. As for the Vanderholts, the impact of that night lingered long after the last guest had departed. Richard and Eleanor struggled to reconcile their carefully constructed image of superiority with the undeniable truth they had been forced to confront. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, they began to change, not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. Their son and daughter-in-law had chosen a different path, one rooted in authenticity rather than appearances, and there was no going back. Years later, when William and Naomi looked back on their wedding day, they remembered it not as a spectacle of extravagance, but as the moment they discovered the true meaning of legacy. The wooden mask, now displayed prominently in their home, served as a constant reminder of the values they held dear. And though Joseph was no longer with them, his presence lived on in every decision they made, every challenge they faced, and every act of love they shared. In the end, the richest man in the room hadn't been the one wearing a designer suit or flashing a diamond-encrusted watch.